Hello, welcome to Classics with Kelsey and Sarah, and today we're talking about Anna and the King of Siam, which I think out of all the books we've read, this is one of the ones I loved the most. Definitely one of the classics that took me by surprise how much I loved it. So I had never read it before.
I hadn't either. Yeah.
And actually, I think after reading Around the Wheelers in 80 Days, we had talked about wanting to get kind of more of a global feel, because, like we said, we kind of tend to the British, England, and Scotland in a lot of our stuff, so we wanted to kind of diversify, and this was definitely...
Yes, very exotic.
Yes.
Obviously Siam, which nowadays is...
Thailand.
Thailand?
Thailand. Yes.
Yeah, so pretty much the opposite side of the world.
Yes. Yeah. And so while this is a novel, it's a novelization of real events, and the lady who wrote this did a lot of research. We almost felt like we were reading nonfiction, and I think pretty much we were, even though some of the stuff is written and fictionalized, because she took Anna's journals and the book she'd written and kind of combined them into a more cohesive story.
Yes, and so it was of course just a fascinating look at this woman, Anna, what's her last name? Lenowens. Lenowens, yeah.
Yes.
And so she grew up in India, and but she, after her husband died, she took on the role of a governess for the King of Siam's children, and he had hundreds of children.
Yes, he had a lot of children, and she also was to educate some of the wives as well. And most people know this more by The King and I, the Rodgers and Hammerstein, and so that I know that we both had watched that. So this was very. I mean, some of the ideas were kind of similar in concepts, but definitely expanded upon and very different in a lot of ways. But a very powerful story, because she encounters a lot of difficulty because it wasn't mandatory for any of the kids or the wives to come to class at all, and so people would come and go, and she's trying to teach in a very tough environment, and she actually spends the first 2 months without anything to teach. She's just like waiting for the king's good pleasure to get her started.
Yeah, and so it's just really hard to imagine what it was like for her to go through all of this and just all of the struggle. But one thing that is apparent in the book is that she was a strong Christian, and so you can tell that she really held on to her faith in God to carry her through this, and she ended up staying there 5 years.
Yeah. And her perseverance, I think, was what most stood out to me. It's just like all the things she encountered, I'm like, I would have given up, because it just like, especially just, people not showing up, and the king was just like, he was very enthusiastic for her to be there, but then he would go through times where he wouldn't care at all and just like completely ignore the issues. And so it was definitely just her perseverance, because she kept going, well, if I stay, there can be a better Siam tomorrow. I can't change the culture that is now, which was so terrible with heavy in slavery, and the king and his brother had multiple wives, and the harems were not good places. And so, but she just like kept that in mind, that if she stayed, that she could create a better Siam for the future.
That's right. Yes, and there's a lot of hard things she had to deal with, like court intrigues and false accusations, not even just against her, but against other people. And so people, some of the Siamese people came to her for help, and so she encountered quite a few heartbreaking situations. And she did make a difference with them, and as well as through teaching the children and the wives.
In fact, I was reading some about the journey to actually write the Anna and the King of Siam, the book, and originally the author found the books. This Englishman had them, but he hid them because he was living in Siam, and he said because Siam had so tried to oppress it because they were so embarrassed about their past. So it was really so that was a very interesting aspect, because by just within a couple of decades of the crown prince who she taught coming to power, a lot of slavery had disappeared, a lot of practices had been reversed, so she had a huge lasting impact.
Yeah, and so I think she was there about 1860s, 1870s. And, well, one of the things we were just talking about before we started the video was she introduced Uncle Tom's Cabin to them. And so, yeah, that was a really well-loved book.
Yes, in fact, one of the characters changed, insisted on being called her Siamese name than Harriet Beecher Stowe, because she just so loved the book. So that was pretty neat.
Yeah. To have that tie-in with another classic that we've read.
Yes. And unintentional, but it was really neat.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely one of my favorites we've read. Just like, and it's so encouraging to be reminded of persevering even when things are tough.
Yes, that's the biggest thing I took from that book as well. And yeah, it definitely made me want to read more books from a more exotic culture.
Yes.
And just try to explore different parts of the world.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I think let's see here. What was the next book we read?
The next book was My Man Jeeves.
Oh, yes. So those were fun. Yes. So join us next time to hear about that.
All right. Thanks for watching. Bye.